The gavel slammed down with finality in the packed federal courtroom in Manhattan. "This man is a liar and a fraud." A voice suddenly boomed from the gallery, shattering the tense silence that followed Judge Thomas Harrington's verdict in the high-stakes fraud case. The speaker, a tall man in a cheap suit named Victor Lang, pointed directly at the bench. "Judge Harrington has been hiding his own dirty secret. He's been living a double life with his gay lover Charles Bennett for years, and that's why he rules against straight men like me." Gasps rippled through the room as reporters scrambled for their phones and cameras flashed. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face, his heart pounding as the words sank in. He had spent decades building a flawless reputation, rising from a modest family in Texas to one of the most respected senior judges in New York, all while keeping his true self locked away. Now, in one moment, it was all unraveling. Charles Bennett sat frozen in the back row, his hands clenched in his lap. He had come to support Thomas discreetly, as he always did, never imagining this public nightmare. Their relationship, built over 4 years of stolen moments and whispered promises, was supposed to be their sanctuary. Thomas had always insisted on secrecy because of his position and his family's traditional expectations. A judge couldn't be gay in their world, or so he believed. Victor, a disgruntled lawyer who had lost several cases before Thomas, had apparently dug deep enough to find photos and messages. How? Charles's mind raced with betrayal and fear. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Bailiffs moved to escort Victor out, but the damage was done. Media outlets were already live tweeting the scandal. "Senior judge exposed in gay affair scandal." One headline would read by evening. Thomas banged the gavel again, trying to restore order, but his voice cracked. "This hearing is adjourned," he managed, before retreating to his chambers, the weight of a lifetime of hiding crashing down on him. Back in his apartment that evening, Thomas paced the floor, his tie loosened and his usually impeccable suit rumpled. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, colleagues, even his mother from Texas. "Thomas, what is this nonsense I'm hearing on the news?" she had demanded earlier. "Your father and I raised you better than this. We expect you to settle down with a nice girl, give us grandchildren. This can't be true." Her words cut deep, echoing the traditional values he had internalized since childhood. He had always been the perfect son, the high achiever who hid his feelings for boys behind sports and academics. Meeting Charles at a quiet art gallery opening 4 years ago had changed everything. Charles, an architect with a gentle smile and a passion for restoring historic buildings, had seen through Thomas's walls immediately. Their first date was a walk in Central Park at dusk, talking about dreams and fears. But Thomas had never let it go public. "My career, my family. They wouldn't understand," he would say. Charles had been patient, but tonight, the patience seemed tested. A knock at the door pulled Thomas from his thoughts. It was Charles, his face pale but determined. "We need to talk," Charles said as he stepped inside, closing the door softly. "This isn't just your secret anymore, Thomas. It's ours. And Victor didn't just slander you. He made it sound like you were biased in cases. Your reputation is on the line." Thomas pulled him into a tight embrace, the familiar scent of Charles's cologne grounding him. "I know. I'm sorry you had to hear it like that. I never wanted this for you." Their foreheads touched, and for a moment the world outside faded. But Thomas could feel the tremor in Charles's shoulders. "What are we going to do?" Charles whispered. Thomas had no answer yet. The night stretched long as they sat on the couch, hands intertwined, the city lights of New York flickering beyond the windows like distant stars they could never quite reach together in public. By morning the story dominated every outlet. Thomas's clerk called to say the chief judge wanted an emergency meeting. Colleagues who once clapped him on the back now avoided eye contact in the hallway. Thomas stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, the lines around his eyes deeper than yesterday. He had built his life on control, fair rulings, measured words, invisible personal life. Now control was gone. Victor's accusation wasn't just about exposure. It questioned every decision Thomas had ever made. Was bias real? Of course not. Thomas had always prided himself on impartiality. But the public wouldn't see it that way. Charles stayed the night, sleeping fitfully beside him. In the quiet hours before dawn, Thomas watched the rise and fall of Charles's chest and wondered if love this Real could survive the storm he had feared for so long. The phone buzzed again, another reporter. Thomas silenced it. For the first time in his adult life, he felt truly seen, and the feeling terrified him. The suspension notice arrived by courier before breakfast. Pending investigation into allegations of bias and conduct unbecoming, it read. Thomas set the paper down with steady hands, though inside, everything shook. Charles poured coffee in the kitchen, the clink of the mug the only sound between them. You don't have to face this alone, Charles said quietly. Thomas wanted to believe him, but the weight of his career pressed heavier than ever. He had spent 22 years on the bench, earning respect through meticulous rulings and late nights studying case law. Now one man's vendetta threatened to erase it all. At the emergency meeting with the chief judge, the air felt thick with unspoken judgment. Thomas, we have to be careful here, Chief Judge Ramirez said, not meeting his eyes. The optics are bad. Take some time. Let the ethics board do its work. Thomas nodded, throat tight. Outside the office, his longtime colleague Ryan waited in the corridor. Rough break, man, Ryan said, clapping Thomas on the shoulder a little too hard. If you need anything, the words sounded supportive, but Thomas caught the flicker of calculation in Ryan's gaze. They had been friendly for years, sharing lunches and court gossip, yet something felt off. Back home, Thomas scrolled through the news on his laptop. Comment sections were brutal, some calling for his resignation, others praising the bravery of coming out even if forced. His mother called again, voice trembling. Your father won't speak to me. He says we raised a liar. Thomas closed his eyes, remembering childhood Sundays in their small Texas church, the sermons about sin and family values. He had buried that boy deep, but the boy was surfacing now, raw and afraid. Charles suggested they go for a walk in Brooklyn, away from the Manhattan spotlight. They held hands only once, in a quiet alley, before letting go at the sight of strangers. I hate hiding, Charles admitted, stopping near the waterfront. I love you, Thomas, but I won't be your secret forever. Not after this. Thomas stopped, the river wind whipping his coat. You think I want this? Every choice I made was to protect us. The words came out sharper than intended. Charles's jaw tightened. Protect us or protect your image? The question hung between them like fog. They walked back in silence, the misunderstandings settling like frost. That evening, Alex, Thomas's closest friend since law school, stopped by with takeout. Alex had always known, the one person Thomas trusted completely. You're stronger than this mess, Alex said, opening containers of Thai food. And Charles is good for you. Don't push him away because you're scared. Thomas nodded, grateful, but the seed of doubt planted by Charles's words grew. Later, alone, he stared at old photos on his phone. Charles laughing at a rooftop party, the two of them on a rare weekend trip to the Hamptons. Love had felt possible in those moments. Now it felt fragile. The next morning, a new headline appeared. Colleague confirms judge's secret relationship. Ryan's name was quoted. Thomas's stomach dropped. The betrayal stung deeper than Victor's accusation. He called Charles immediately. I need you, he said simply. Charles arrived within the hour, and they sat on the couch without speaking for a long time, the city humming outside. Thomas realized then that the real fight wasn't just against Victor or the press. It was against the version of himself he had constructed to survive. Thomas's mother insisted on a video call the following weekend. Her face filled the screen, lined with disappointment. We always knew you were different, but we prayed it was a phase. Your father is heartbroken. Behind her, the familiar Texas living room with its American flag and family Bible looked unchanged, yet everything felt distant. Thomas swallowed hard. Mom, this is who I am. Charles is part of my life. She shook her head. We raised you to be a man who stands for something. What will people at church say? The call ended with her tears, leaving Thomas drained. Charles watched from the doorway, eyes soft with understanding. Families take time, he said gently. Mine didn't exactly throw a parade either when I came out at 19. They drove to Charles's apartment in Queens that afternoon, the first time Thomas had stayed there openly since the scandal broke. The space was filled with architectural models and sunlight streaming through tall windows. Charles poured wine and they talked late into the night, about the fears Thomas had carried since college, the nights he spent alone wondering if happiness was possible for someone like him. I thought being a judge meant I had to be perfect, Thomas confessed. Impartial. Untouchable. Charles took his hand. Perfection isn't love. Being real is. But tension lingered. When a reporter called Charles directly asking for comment, Thomas suggested he stay silent. It's my career on the line, he said. Charles set his glass down harder than necessary. And my life isn't. I've waited 4 years in the shadows, Thomas. Maybe it's time you decide what matters more. The words landed like stones. Charles slept on the couch that night, leaving Thomas alone in the bed staring at the ceiling. Sacrifice felt like the only option. Maybe letting Charles go would save them both. In the morning, Charles made breakfast, eggs and toast on mismatched plates. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. But I won't hide anymore. If we're doing this, we do it together. Thomas looked at the man across the table, the one who had seen him at his most vulnerable, and stayed. Something shifted inside him, a crack in the armor he had worn for decades. He reached across and took Charles's hand. Together, he repeated. The word felt both terrifying and freeing. Later that week, Thomas met with a civil attorney about suing Victor for defamation. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena, laid out the risks. It'll be public. You'll have to testify about your relationship. Are you ready for that? Thomas thought of his mother's tears, Ryan's betrayal, and Charles's steady presence. I am now, he said. The decision felt like the first honest step he had taken in years. Outside the office, autumn leaves swirled in the wind, and for the first time Thomas noticed how bright the sky looked over the city he had always called home. The defamation lawsuit moved quickly through the system, landing on another judge's docket to avoid conflict. Thomas spent days preparing his statement, writing and rewriting the words that would finally make his truth public. Charles sat beside him at the kitchen table, offering quiet feedback. Say what you feel, not what you think they want to hear, he advised. Their relationship had grown stronger in the quiet spaces between court dates, shared dinners, long talks about the future, even a weekend drive upstate where they held hands openly on country roads. The misunderstanding from weeks earlier had faded, replaced by a deeper commitment. Then came the turning point. Victor's company was named in a separate federal case involving financial misconduct, the very kind Thomas had ruled on before. Though Thomas recused himself immediately, the media spun it as proof of bias. Headlines screamed again. Pressure mounted from every side. Ryan, exposed as the source of additional leaks, sent a weak apology text that Thomas deleted without reply. Friendship, once solid, now lay in ruins. One evening, Charles came home from his architecture firm looking exhausted. My boss asked if the publicity was affecting client meetings, he said, loosening his tie. I told him the truth, that I'm proud of who I am and who I love. Thomas pulled him close. You're braver than I've ever been. In that moment, Thomas understood sacrifice wasn't about stepping away. It was about standing together when the world demanded separation. The investigation into Thomas's conduct concluded with a formal warning, but no removal. The ethics board found no evidence of bias in his rulings. Still, the damage lingered. Thomas decided to take a leave of absence, using the time to reflect on what came next. He and Charles spent quiet evenings planning, not just for the lawsuit, but for a life no longer hidden. Whatever happens in that courtroom, Charles said one night, we walk out together. Thomas kissed him softly, the kind of kiss that carried 4 years of unspoken promises. As the defamation trial date approached, Thomas felt a strange calm. The man who once feared exposure now saw it as liberation. Victor's accusations had stripped away the mask, revealing someone stronger underneath. Friends like Alex rallied with supportive messages. Even Thomas's sister called from Texas, saying their mother had started reading articles about LGBTQ rights. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. The city outside continued its relentless pace, yet inside their shared world, something new was taking root. Acceptance, not just from others, but from Thomas himself. The defamation trial opened on a crisp November morning. Cameras lined the courthouse steps as Thomas and Charles arrived hand in hand for the first time publicly. Reporters shouted questions, but Thomas kept his gaze forward, Charles's steady presence beside him. Inside, Victor sat at the defense table, smirking until the evidence unfolded. Emails, payment records showing he had paid Ryan for information, and the private photos he had stolen from Charles's old cloud account. When Thomas took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. "I hid my relationship because I was afraid," he said, voice clear. "Afraid of losing the bench, afraid of disappointing my family, afraid the world wouldn't see me as the judge I worked to become. But love isn't something to hide. Charles Bennett is the best part of my life, and no slander changes that." Charles testified next, describing the quiet years of support, the nights Thomas came home drained from court but lit up in private. "He never let me feel second place," Charles said, eyes meeting Thomas's across the room, "until the world forced us into the light." Cross-examination grew heated when Victor's lawyer tried to paint Thomas as biased. Elena, Thomas's attorney, countered with decades of case records showing impartial rulings. The emotional peak came when Ryan was called as a witness. Under oath, he admitted accepting money to leak details. "I thought it would help my career," Ryan muttered. The betrayal landed like a final blow, but Thomas felt only pity. During a recess, Charles pulled Thomas into a quiet hallway. "No matter what the verdict is, I'm proud of you," he whispered. They embraced, the kind of hug that said everything words could not, years of fear dissolving into shared strength. Back in the courtroom, closing arguments wrapped, and the jury deliberated for only 2 hours. The verdict came swift and clear: Victor liable for defamation, ordered to pay substantial damages, and issue a public apology. Reporters surged forward as Thomas and Charles left the building. Flashes popped, but this time Thomas smiled. The ruling had done more than make Victor pay financially. It had freed Thomas to live openly. That night they celebrated quietly at home, Charles cooking pasta while Thomas set the table. "We made it," Charles said, raising a glass. Thomas looked at the man he loved and felt the last pieces of his old self fall away. He was no longer just a judge. He was Thomas, fully, honestly himself. Months later, the dust had settled. Victor's company folded under the financial judgment, and he disappeared from public life. Thomas chose not to return to the bench full-time. Instead, he accepted a position with a legal advocacy group focused on judicial ethics and LGBTQ rights. The work felt meaningful in a way his old role never had after the scandal. Charles's firm promoted him to lead architect on a historic restoration project in Brooklyn, and they moved into a larger apartment together overlooking the river. Thomas's family slowly came around. His mother visited New York for Christmas, meeting Charles over dinner. "He makes you happy," she admitted quietly in the kitchen. "That's what matters." His father still struggled with words, but sent a card on Thomas's birthday, small gestures that meant the world. Alex remained a constant friend, and even some former colleagues reached out with support. The journey had fractured some bonds, but forged others stronger. One spring evening, Thomas and Charles walked the Brooklyn Bridge, hands openly linked as the city lights sparkled below. "Remember the day everything exploded?" Charles asked. Thomas laughed softly. "Best worst day of my life." They stopped at the center, the wind carrying the sound of traffic and distant ferry horns. Thomas turned to Charles, the man who had stood beside him through every storm. "Thank you for never giving up on me." Charles smiled, pulling him close. "We did this together." Looking back, Thomas saw the man he used to be, guarded, careful, always calculating risk. The scandal had stripped that away, revealing someone capable of real courage. Love hadn't been the threat, hiding it had. In the end, the ruling that made Victor pay had given Thomas something far more valuable: the freedom to live without shame. As they continued walking, the future stretched bright ahead, not perfect, but honest. Thomas squeezed Charles's hand, grateful for every step that had led them here. True or false? Hiding your true identity is the only way to survive in today's society?